Good morning, everyone. We're not starting yet. We still have a minute to go. So we have learned that Facebook and the live stream on Facebook needs a moment. So we are allowing for Facebook live stream and click meeting to sync. In the meantime, I'm happy all of you joined again or for the first time. As we did in the first and second module, please let me know where you're currently sitting. In my case, I'm Austrian and I'm sitting right now in Lisbon, Portugal. What about you guys? Okay, we have Warsaw, Milan, Zurich, Poland, Bucharest, in Milan. Okay. From the US, Bob, what time is it? In Milan. Italy, Austria. Fantastic. Italy, Poland. So quite a mix. Singapore. Oh, fantastic. So we have quite different time zones from the US up to Singapore, passing through Portugal, Italy, Austria, and Poland, and Germany. Okay, so this is really a global webinar. By module 3, we've made it global with Singapore. Okay, it's 10 a.m. Let's get started. Today, we have the third module of our job search support webinars. The topic is how to find and contact recruiters and companies and how to network. I have prepared 287 slides, so this will be a very intensive webinar. The presentation will not be saved or shared. So we are doing recording, so please do take notes. If you haven't heard of myself or Career Angels before, the most important thing to know from today's perspective is the following. I used to work in executive search. I founded Career Angels in June 10 years ago. And what's very important, my team of over 20 people and I systematically collect data that we then interpret. So everything we're sharing now is not based on our professional opinion. It's not based on our own experience. We deduct what works and what doesn't work from having collected data and reactions of over 5,000 headhunters and almost 20,000 decision makers. And some of the things, as you will see today, are actually counterintuitive. Good. About today, I already mentioned that. Hi, Paris and Cluj. Please do take notes. The presentation will not be shared. It will be interactive with exercises. So make sure you have access to your chat and everything's working. You can ask questions by using the chat here in Click Meeting. If you're joining through the live stream on Facebook, please use the comment section. One of my colleagues from Career Angel is constantly looking at the comments on Facebook and sharing them here in the chat, so I don't miss anything. Good. Coronavirus. The coronavirus has shaken up the job market. We went from employee market to employer market. When that happened, within literally a week, Career Angels, a career boutique, so we are on the side of the candidates, not the companies, we immediately prepared a job search and career management guide for the current situation, because within the first days and weeks, the most common question that we have been receiving is, should I change jobs? How do I find a job now that maybe not everybody's getting fired, but a lot of people are getting laid off? do I take the job offer that I've just received? Is it safe, etc.? So we immediately reacted and prepared a dedicated job search and career management guide. And I checked today in the morning, we're still the only career services and outplacement company that offers part of their services completely free of charge. And if you want to support us, you can join in our crowdfunding efforts on PayPal. So the coronavirus has some immediate effects that we can immediately see. One of them is the amount of job offers on LinkedIn. I know it's not a perfect KPI, but it is a signal of what is going on the job market. As you can see, here we have 18 countries. Those are the 18 most important countries from our clients' perspective. In week 13, when we realized that this is not a temporary situation, but temporarily permanent, we started tracking that KPI, and you can see in the last 5 weeks, so from week 13, calendar week 13 to week 18, in 18 countries, 900,979 job ads have disappeared from LinkedIn. As I mentioned, it's not a perfect KPI. It doesn't mean that all of those jobs have disappeared. Some of them have moved to local, cheaper alternatives. Okay. Then here you can see them sorted. I mean, it is a big indication. You can see Czechia, almost minus 50% of job ads on LinkedIn, 48.18%. In week 16, we extended the monitoring to 36 countries in Europe. And here you can see that from week 17 to 18, we've seen a drop of 187,000 job ads, which goes from still an increase of 32% up to a decrease of minus 35%. But what's even more interesting is to see it from a 2-week perspective. It's almost 500,000 job ads disappearing across 36 countries. And here you have them again sorted. Belgium minus 20, Estonia minus 9.57, etc. So if you have been affected by what's currently going on, or you fear that something might happen soon to your employment stability, it's important to follow the job search strategy. As a review, the job search strategy goes across 4 steps. First step, define the goal and define your branding and positioning as a candidate, which we discussed in module 1. Step number 3, make sure you have 2 CVs, one for the humans, one for the applicant tracking systems, and make sure that your LinkedIn profile is optimized. We discussed it a week ago during module 2. Module 3 is today, and this is about how to use all 4 channels. Next week, we'll talk about how to prepare for interviews. So the idea is today we'll show you how to generate interest in a job market, which will lead to interviews. So as a reminder, the 4 channels are speculative introduction, networking, executive search firms, and job ads. This is based on our own client data, and we look at the efficiency of the channels defined by what was the channel, not that generated a job offer, but the best job offer, the one that generated a job offer that was accepted by our clients. And when I say by our clients, also to add 70% board -1 on a local and regional level, and more than 25% are experienced managers. And the data is 95% Europe, 5% outside of Europe. So this would be, for example, one of the first counterintuitive things that data show us. Usually when I ask, so what do you think, which of the job channels is the most effective one? Almost everybody says networking, followed by executive search, and then ex aequo usually speculative introduction and job ads. And I'll explain how each and every one of those channels works today. Good. Looking at the last 3 years, we can see that speculative introduction, meaning contacting your potential boss directly, has an efficiency rate of 45.67%, networking 29%, executive search firms 15%, and job ads 10.33%. So let's get started with the direct approach or speculative introduction. How does that work? You contact decision makers, your potential boss, at minimum 75 to 90 well-selected companies directly by email. That's a definition of how the channel works. 75 to 90 companies. If you don't have time to look for a job, in other words, if you have certain time pressures, make sure you make a list right away of 90 to 120 companies. It saves approximately 3 to 4 months of job search time to be on the safe side. And well-selected companies means that they are in line with the goal that we discussed in the first module. What does that mean? Sourcing, preparing a list of companies in line with the goal. Especially now, I recommend candidates to choose the path of the least resistance. So look for jobs where you have the most obvious fit. In other words, which companies will see the biggest benefit in hiring you? And here you can go by industry, by problems you can solve that they have, by size, by origin, by rankings, by their level of maturity, by location/geography, or by the type of ownership. And I'd like to go through each and every one systematically. How do you find companies by industry? Here, Wikipedia has lots of good lists. So here, for example, top pharmaceutical companies with revenue greater than 10 billion. And you can also find top pharmaceutical companies with revenue below 10 billion, etc. So this is one. You can check Wikipedia. Google is your big friend, especially if you look for rankings. You can check out market reports, industry portals, etc. So this is industry specific, is the easiest, one of the easiest lists to prepare. By problems, in other words, by problems you can solve because of your competencies, is a little bit more difficult. And problems you can solve from a company's perspective is, can you help them make money or save money directly or indirectly? To give you a couple of examples, are you good at post-merger integration? Do you see that they have bad opinions on job portals and you are in HR or employer branding? Can you help them with cost optimization? Maybe they have bad customer reviews and you are in marketing and know about customer experience. Maybe you work in sales, etc. So how do you find out about problems companies have? You obviously can read information in the media. You can track KPIs, reviews, rankings, etc. You can ask your network. Listen, if you hear of a company that has XYZ problem, let me know. Good. Then by size. Size can be expressed in the number of employees, turnover, or presence. So in terms of how many countries they are present, number of cities. Question here obviously could say, why does that matter? Size can be an indication of the corporate culture. It can hint at how stable a company potentially is. And it can also show how fast a company potentially is. A conglomerate is usually slower in decision making. A startup, small company might be much faster. You can look at the origin of companies. As probably all of you know, in some countries, the local language is very important, which might be an obstacle during job search if you are not fluent in them. So how do you go about that? You find companies that are from your country or language group because they're usually less demanding when it comes to local language skills. In other words, let's say you're based in Austria, but originally from Russia. You then look for Russian companies with a presence in Austria. Where can you find companies from your country or your language group? Here, very good source of lists are chambers of commerce. Something else you can do, you can also look for companies that are from your new country. So in that, the example that I just mentioned, so you would go for Austrian companies with a presence in your home country. So in that example, it would be Russia, or language group, which then could be Ukraine, Kazakhstan, etc. And they also might need your language and cultural skills. And here again, the lists with the chambers of commerce are invaluable. By origin, and you have some tips for managers, especially CEOs and people in sales. You can actually prepare two separate lists. List number one of companies already in the country, and the second list, companies not yet in the country, but in similar neighboring countries. How does that work? And how have we done that in the past with our clients? We would look, to give an example, we had a CEO in the construction industry, with that I can say with German language skills. So we looked at construction companies from Germany and Austria that were already in, let's say, Czechia, Hungary, Slovakia, Ukraine, but not yet in Poland. And we approached those companies saying, listen, I see that you are already present in our neighboring countries. What about Poland? Maybe you'd like to get started there. Then you can look by rankings or awards, if that's important to you. We have one ranking by Great Place to Work. I do have to mention rankings are controversial because to be in the rankings, you sometimes have to pay. So, yeah. You can Google for global or local rankings, best employers, best places to work, Glassdoor, etc. Or you can Google for something friendliness. So there are friendly workplaces for working moms, workplaces friendly for part-time, etc., etc. They are also relatively easy to find if you go for awards or rankings for creativity, for innovation. Then Big Four prepare lots of really great reports. Here an example, fastest growing Fast 50 technology for Central Europe. So you can see what kind of technology companies are fastest growing in Central Europe and get in touch with them, etc., etc. You can look at the level of maturity, which again is an indication of culture and what kind of problems they have. So here, as an example, you can look at startups with financing, for startups with third round of financing. You can look at companies that are intensively expanding, ones that are stable, ones that have been over 10, 25, or 100 years on the market, etc., etc. Then by location and geography, and here that might sound a little bit funny, but it's about being creative and finding problems to solutions, finding solutions to problems. One thing could be to actually have a look at where you live and check out the closest office buildings and look what kind of companies are there. And then if within the closest office buildings there are no companies of your interest, you then keep expanding it. You can check for proximity of local, regional, or global headquarters, especially if you have a certain mix of language skills. You can actually open Google Maps to find companies that are close to where you live or want to work, and you might be surprised. Because we think we know what's in our neighborhood, but I've done this exercise many times, you might be surprised. So how do you do that? You search for very specific keywords to rather broad keywords, because you never know if and how companies position themselves on Google Maps. And very important, you search in both English and the local language. So here, just for the fun of it, I selected Sevilla in Spain and checked for human resources, recursos humanos. And here I already have a list of about 10, 15 companies that could potentially be potential employers if I were ever to move to Sevilla and, well, quit Career Angels and become a headhunter or go into HR consulting. But this shows how Google Maps can actually help you. Good, then we can look at the type of ownership. Do you want to work for a company with a private owner? And here it is in parentheses and in quotation marks. Do you want to have, and it is a big difference, work for a normal private owner or a rich private owner? What I mean by that is the various millionaires in your country that are usually known for having a certain, at least the majority, a certain culture influenced by their erratic personalities. So maybe that's something that you like and see as a challenge, or you say, maybe I'll go with a private owner that is more normal. Family owned. Do you want to work for a family owned business? That has, again, advantages and disadvantages. One of them being, if you're not family, it's very unlikely for you to make it to the board. Then we can look at partnerships, holdings, so big holdings of several companies, corporations traded on the stock exchange. For anybody in PR and communications know there are different rules if you work for a company that is traded on the stock exchange, and if you're in a spokesperson for a corporation not traded on the stock exchange. Type of ownership could also be if you look at companies that are co-owned or owned by private equity and venture capital. Again, here has potential advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages could be, if it works out, a big carrot at the end of your employment contract. When the private equity or venture capital firm exits, there might be a financial reward at the end. Disadvantages, if it's not something that you enjoy, it could be very aggressive culture, pressure on delivering results, etc., etc. Good. So now that you know how to make a list of companies, and I know this has been very fast. So step one, make a list of companies, which we call sourcing. Once you have that, you need to find your potential boss. Find their email address. And step number 4, we'll get to in a bit. How do you find your potential boss? So here we have LinkedIn, Xing, local platforms. You can check out the company website. You can Google or Yahoo. And here my recommendation is to actually use Yahoo as an alternative to Google, because they do have different search algorithms. You can ask your network if internet doesn't help. And you might now think that the slides haven't changed. Find your potential boss, and the next slide says find their email address. And to find the email address, you do exactly the same. LinkedIn, Xing, or local platforms, you go onto the company website, you Google your Yahoo, or you ask your network. Now, what's important, you actually don't need to identify the direct email address. it is enough to find two different pieces of information and combine that info. You need the name of your potential boss, and independently, you need the email address structure. With that, you will be able to find approximately 95% of email addresses of your potential superior on your own. And after today, we will also send you a guide of how to actually find those email addresses step by step. How you can also find email addresses, a couple of tips. You can check their investor relations tab on the website or their annual reports. You can check out and look for media contacts, social media specialists, HR contact person, or use sites like hunter.io or emailformat.com. One thing that you can also try is brute force, meaning you simply try first name dot last name at and the domain, first initial of the first name dot last name at etc. So I mean, there is a limited number of combinations that you can try. And as I mentioned, you will receive a full guide of how to find email addresses step by step after the webinar. My one tip here: if you receive an error message, read the error message carefully. Often we have the feeling that we received an error message because the email address is not correct. But when we actually start reading the content, the type of error, you will realize that, for example, that particular server doesn't allow Gmail emails from Gmail accounts or from local mail email providers. So do make sure to actually read the type of error, because it doesn't always mean that it's a wrong email address. It might be that the person doesn't work there anymore, but it's not yet been made public, etc., etc. Good. So direct approach. We said sourcing, find your potential boss, find their email address. Step number 4, contact them. You might remember this one from the second module. So when looking for a job, it is like unlocking levels in a video game. The subject line helps us to get the call to action, click on the email or delete. The right cover email makes the person click on the CV or click delete, etc., etc. So what we're now looking at is the subject line and the cover email. So what do you do? In other words, what do you do for somebody to actually read the email and open your CV? So subject line. And here a question to everyone present and on live streaming on Facebook. What would you say is a good subject line when contacting your potential boss? I'm curious, what ideas do you have? Don't be shy. Need a job? Okay, CV of experienced finance executive. Proposal corporation. Supply chain manager value proposition, full name, what I can offer. Okay, let's treat your proposals as a brainstorming of what not to do. Okay. The most commonly used subject lines are the name and CV. My favorite, all caps lock. Looking for a job, need a job, CV off, simply CV. Do you want to increase sales? So something a little bit more attractive. And I'm sorry to say this won't really work, because it does say I'm looking for a job. And if you contact your potential boss, the reaction might be, but we are not hiring. Remember, you make a list of companies that you want to work for and not a list of companies that have published job ads. It is a completely different dynamics here. So if the subject line already says CV, looking for a job, potentially spammer, desperate, wants to sell me something, etc., immediately delete. We've done the experiment, it doesn't work. So what do you do instead? The subject line should be something neutral and enigmatic. Definitely not desperate. Something that says business as usual. For example, executive team, sales team, direct contact, maybe Joanna's proposal could work, or cooperation, but something that really says business as usual. Now, over to the cover email. It has to be written for your potential boss. Ron says, can you show some practical examples? Those were those practical examples. That actually said executive team, sales team, direct contact. So that's it. There is no more. It has to be business as usual. And what's important, everybody's in a different situation, different company, different potential boss, different background, different problems they can solve. So there is no one size fits all kind of solution. So make sure it fits neutral, not desperate, business as usual. Now, once we get over this obstacle of subject line where they say, okay, what is that? I'm interested, I'm intrigued, click on it. Now, the cover email itself has to be written to the point. It has to show what you have to offer to them, not what it is that you want. It has to be personalized. And here's an example, and I'll walk you through all sections of the cover email. So we start by dear, da 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 da. So we have personalization number 1. And then the first sentence here, for example, I'm getting in touch to inquire whether company, and I have a second personalization, company name, is considering strengthening its team of marketeers, finance, etc. So in other words, why you're contacting them. Very short sentence. If so, briefly about myself, and here you summarize your profile summary. In other words, it is your unique selling proposition. So it is not in the last 15 years. 15 years ago, I started my career as a junior accounting specialist where I worked for 2 years. No, this is about what you have to offer to them, which also means that you need a really good CV and a unique profile summary, which we discussed in module 2. And what's super important, especially when getting in touch with your potential superior boss, make sure they know after reading those 5 bullet points that they know what your potential value is. And not just what's in it for me. I would like to join your company because I want to develop and no. So it's not what's in it for you as a candidate if you join a company, but what's in it for your potential employer when hiring you. And then you add anything that's relevant, for example, language skills, relocation, etc. And then please find attached my CV with documented successes. If you are at a C-level, then also add your business cases or project portfolio. I'd appreciate your brief feedback. Kind regards. I'll go back because I know it was quick. Do you have any questions to that? Okay. If you are watching on Facebook, if you have any questions to that part, let me know. So this is really a relatively brief cover email with concrete data, especially in the briefly about myself part. while you're typing your questions, let me get to the next slide. So summarizing, direct approach, list of companies, find your potential boss and their email address. Step number 4, contact them. Step number 5, which is something a lot of people ignore, follow up within 7 to 10 business days if you have not received an answer. Good. Let's look at Headhunters in a bit. Here again, if you have questions to the direct approach, now is the time to ask. One question, any need to consider the environmental culture in the regard? You mean corporate culture in terms of how the company communicates? Well, I'm not sure what you mean, but we have run very detailed experiments to see the difference, if there is a difference in response rate and interview rate. So at the end, how many companies actually show, how many companies react and how many companies interview our client. And we ran the experiment across very high personalization to standard personalization. There was no significant difference. So usually it's enough to personalize. Again, and I do have to mention that just to be sure, if you have a list, we said, for example, CEOs and sales can make 2 different types of lists of companies that are in the country and companies that are not yet in the country. Of course, here, the email would depend on whether there is a presence or there isn't a presence. So usually when you have a list of 75 to 120 companies, you will find sub-segments, usually 2 or 3 groups, maybe 4, of companies where you can then slightly adapt the cover email. How to follow up. You take the initial email, click forward, and say, "Dear Mr. Smith, I'd like to make sure you have received my below email. Looking forward to having your response. Kind regards, Zbigniew." Edita, do you recommend to contact a few people in the same company at the same time? No. Our recommendation is to first contact one person, wait if they reply. If there's no reply, you follow up. If after the follow-up there's no reply, then you move on to the next person. Would you suggest us as a tool to manage the 60 to 90 companies and their follow-ups besides Excel? Well, the tool that we use is actually Excel. We love Excel spreadsheets. We use Google Sheets for that, where we meticulously track what kind of status the company has. It's great for sorting companies and response. Have they responded? How have they responded? Do we need to follow up? So if anybody has a better tool than Excel, please do let me know. Andrea, is it worth to send an email again after a while in case of no reply? Not the email again, but the follow-up. And if after the follow-up there's no response, then try an alternative decision maker, which I'll get to in about 10 minutes, 15 maybe. Is it good to give in the first mail information about date answer? I'm not sure I understand your question. If you could rephrase that. Is an offer with sample of work, for instance, as mechanical engineer, graphic, etc., in the first email a good idea? Okay, so Anna's asking, is it a good idea to add examples of your work? Remember, let me go back to this slide 126. Please find attached my CV with documented successes. If it's relevant, you could then add business cases or project portfolio. And in the case of a mechanical engineer, that would be a project portfolio. So definitely add something that proves how you work and what you have been able to accomplish in the past. Now, the way, and thank you for asking this question, the way it usually works is you contact the source directly. So you don't go through HR, you don't go through career@something.com, but you go directly to the brain of the person who is in charge of the department. They know what kind of, often not yet verbalized plans they have and strategies they have. So by going straightly to the source, the first reaction, once they start reading it, so once you get through the hurdle of deleting the email, so once the subject line is as neutral as possible and they start reading, their first impression, their first thought will be, but I'm not hiring. And then what you want to do, but people are curious, right? So if they have started reading, I'll have at least a look at the CV. And then if your CV was super well prepared without any flaws, see module 2, they'll say, oh, this is a really nice CV. I haven't seen one like this before. Oh, they have been able to increase sales by 2% in a segment we haven't even been able to get into. Then they look at a second attachment, again, curiosity, and they see your philosophy, how you've done something, etc. So it's like, we're not hiring, but this person has good ideas. Maybe I should talk to them for at least 15 minutes. And very often that approach helps companies create positions that didn't exist before, replace people that they meant to replace for quite some time, but HR processes, big corporations, budget, hiring in an executive search firm, etc. So this approach and adding proof of what you've done so far is a really good idea. What do you think about following up by email versus by phone? In our experience, following up by email is less invasive and gets better KPIs. Having said that, there is a difference between small and medium-sized companies versus international corporations. So if your target group are smaller companies, you can try by phone. Overall, the bigger and more international the corporations, definitely try first by email. Okay, I see there is one more person typing up a question. Do we have any questions from Facebook? No. No live streaming questions. Good. Once you send your CV to a future boss and received an answer to send the CV to HR, what do you do? Okay, you send it to HR. More often than not, already the decision maker will forward your CV to HR. Very often because of compliance regulations. So it's not that it's like, oh yeah, HR deals with it. But if, let's say, the CEO or COO, CFO says, HR, please interview this person, please screen this person, there is a different reaction to and a different priority given to candidates coming from the business side versus candidates applying through the company website. So definitely do whatever the decision maker asks you to do. It could be a compliance thing, and if it says please send your CV to HR, then you do that. If they say thank you, everything needs to be processed through the website, then upload your CV to through the website and make sure to use your ATS-friendly CV when doing so. What about reaching people directly through LinkedIn messaging system? It has been our experience that this gets much, much lower response rates. We only use it if at the very end we have still 10, 15 companies that we haven't been able to get a response from and that are important to our clients. Then as a last resort, we try LinkedIn direct mail. Okay, wait, headhunters. So I know some headhunters are actually listening in today. So as we've already discussed in the past modules, headhunters outside of pandemics and crisis already receive on average 50 unsolicited CVs per day. Unsolicited means CVs they have not asked for. When you calculate that, it's 250 CVs per week, 1,000 CVs per month, and 12,000 CVs per year for one single person sometimes. Now, in times addition on top of that, they very often have anywhere between 5 and 15 ongoing parallel recruitment projects, and they have to fulfill KPIs, business development KPIs, which would be 3 client calls per day, 3 client meetings per week, a certain number of sales calls, etc., etc. In times like these, they're flooded with CVs, so it's much more than outside of crisis times. So here, even more, we need to make sure that you reach the right headhunters in the right way. So let's look at how that channel works. Usually, if you have been reading our literature, you will see that we recommend getting in touch with 30 to 40 recruiters, headhunters per country. In times like these, I'd say you can easily extend them to 50 plus per country that you are actively interested in working. And here I have added in parentheses, unless the country is city-driven. City-driven countries are Germany, the United States, England to a certain extent, or the UK. How does that work? So, for example, in Germany, 50 plus or 50 headhunters for the country wouldn't be enough. You would additionally have to look for headhunters that are based in the cities that you are actively interested in moving to or working in. So if you have an international profile and you say, well, based on my language skills and what I've been doing in the past, I could easily work in DACH, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and I don't know, for some reason, France. That would then mean 4 countries times 50 is 200 plus city-driven. So you look at having to contact anywhere between 200 and 300 headhunters. When sourcing headhunters, when making the list of headhunters, you need to know about them that headhunters can have a generalistic profile. Sometimes they specialize and are divided up by roles. So sometimes, for example, they specialize in finance profiles, marketing, so sales and marketing, or they're divided into industry. This is more for your information. It doesn't influence your research. Headhunters are paid either upon success or in stages, anywhere from 10 to 33% of the gross annual remuneration, spelling mistake, gross annual remuneration of the candidate. Now, what I've found with a lot of candidates is the frustration of not receiving feedback from recruiters. And the thinking very often is, hey, but if they hire me, they'll get 15,000 euro or 15,000 zloty or 50,000, any other currency. What you need to remember, you're only one of hundreds of candidates, and very often speed is important. So especially if it is a high speed upon success search, and there were candidates, let's say a recruiter gets in touch with 50 potential candidates, and 5 really good ones respond within 3 hours, send in their CVs, and the next day they have been interviewed, and the next day they've been presented to the candidate, and you as a candidate take 48 hours to even react and say, well, I don't know, do you want my CV, but what position is that? there's a completely different dynamic. So I understand the frustration. I hear you candidates, but you also need to remember there is a dynamics that is happening outside of what you see. There is something going on behind the scenes. So being angry at them doesn't work. They will get in touch with you next time they have a recruitment project. Where do you find them? Again, Google them. There are lots of rankings, websites that rank them. You can find them on LinkedIn. You can look at job portals and see what kind of recruitment companies post job ads that you find interesting. Again, you need to remember not all job ads are actually published. Some, and when I say some, over almost 1 million have been taken down, but that doesn't mean that they have disappeared. So it could be cost savings. Now, if you're an experienced manager or executive, I highly recommend you check out the Association of Executive Search and Leadership Consultants. That is a website that enlists so-called retained executive search consultants, so those who are paid usually in stages and have a more traditional approach to headhunting. Good. How do you find the email addresses? They're usually on the websites or LinkedIn or Xing. You contact them by email first because they get a lot of contact requests by LinkedIn. So it's really just clicking yes without really interacting. Now, what's super important, you get in touch with the CV in PDF form, knowing that it's very likely they'll ask about the doc version. Remember, we looked at CVs during the second module, and I showed you examples of CVs that were completely scrambled up because they had not been sent in PDF form. So again, some of our clients say, well, but why don't I send the doc version right away if it is very likely for them to ask about it anyway? The thing is, you don't know what kind of text editor they have. So it's safer, and yes, it's probably 5 more minutes a day, 5 more minutes more of work for you per day, but it's really worth it because, I mean, it's your first impression, it's your personal brand. Cover email. So how do we get in touch with them? Help recruiters understand who you are. In other words, define the box you want them to put you into, help them read. Subject line, add the role. So not finance manager looking for a job, but simply finance manager, for example. And the text, dear XXX, I'd like to ask if you or your colleagues are currently recruiting for finance manager roles based in Vienna, Munich, Austria, etc. My profile, and here you summarize the unique selling proposition, but you keep it broad. So you don't have to add the level of detail and successes that a potential boss would expect. Attached my CV. Have a nice day. Step number 1. So with the Headhunters, you make a list, you find the most relevant consultant, you find their email address, and you contact them. I can see Kalina is typing. Step number 5, you follow up within 7 to 10 business days. Now, let's look at the difference between cover emails for headhunters and potential employers. In terms of length, the email to the headhunters is short. To your potential boss, it's still short, but a little bit longer because it has more level of detail and your potential added value. Level of detail for the headhunter, you say, this is my box. For top, Kalina just writes, based on my over 20 years of experience of headhunting, I confirm everything that Sandra says. I would say, oof. Thank you for doing that. Level of detail, you add your successes and your potential added value. When it comes to personalization, with the headhunters, you make sure to address the headhunter. So it's only the name, the person that you're writing to. With the company's potential employers, you make sure you also personalize the email by referring to the company that you are contacting. Attachments, only the CV. For the headhunters, no business cases, no project portfolios, etc. But you do add them when getting in touch with your potential boss. What you can do with the attachments for headhunters after or at the end of the first interview, you can ask the recruiter, especially if you see that there might be a second stage, to say, listen, I have business cases, I have a list of projects. Is that something you could find useful? And then they will tell you yes or no. Good. So now let's look at inbox management. Quick question. Do you have any questions to the headhunters? And in the meantime, I'll read my next question. And again, if you are watching on live stream on Facebook, feel free to ask your questions in the comment section there. You mentioned not only about LinkedIn, but also about Xing. Is that important to have a Xing account as well to find headhunters, etc.? Good question. So Xing, I keep mentioning Xing because I know that some of you are based in Germany, Switzerland, Austria. Although Xing is internationally, globally expanding a lot, it still in its roots is a German speaking based portal, and there are still recruiters and executives and HR people that refuse to use LinkedIn. And that's why you need to be on Xing, even if it's only for the time of your job search. Make sure you have the Xing profile if one of the main markets is Germany, Austria, Switzerland. One more question. When we write to HR, do we write as to top or as to the headhunter? Martin, would HR be your potential boss? Let me clarify this here. Okay, because without having an answer to that, because here Martin asks, when we write to HR, do we write as to top or as to headhunter? Well, I'm now assuming that Martin means when not writing to our direct boss and we go to the HR department instead. I will comment on that with data in a bit. Okay. Okay, so Martin now confirms no, but they know the needs of the organization. I'll get to that in a bit. Okay, Dorota has a very good question. Do you recommend contacting, let's go back here. Do you recommend contacting more than one headhunter from the same recruitment company? That's a very good question. Thank you. When we look at headhunters, we already know, and I hope if you've been with me starting from the first module, you will see that recruiters are very busy individuals under a lot of pressure. So let's say that for some reason your profile, let's say you are a finance person in the pharma industry, and the recruitment firm that you contact has two different consultants. One specializes in finance roles and the other one specializes in pharma. Here, and they're sitting in the same office, maybe even next to each other. Well, maybe not now, but usually. They don't have time to share candidates. So here, if that were your case, I'd say get in touch with both of them. Get in touch with both of them. So this is one example. It happens rarely. So usually you can make an educated guess and ask about colleagues. And if they say, oh, actually, finance and pharma is more my colleagues, they will proactively forward you to their colleague. That's one thing. Number two, if you look for, if it is a city-driven country, and let's say it's Germany, and you could be working in Berlin, Munich, or Frankfurt, and you already got in touch with the Munich office, do get in touch separately with the Berlin office and the Frankfurt office. So definitely yes. And that also means if you've been in touch with an international recruitment company in Germany, but you're also looking for a job in Austria, get in touch with both of them. Now, there are certain reactions that you can expect. Susanna says, in my professional opinion, it is better to contact the researchers as they are the ones that find the candidates, not the headhunters. Here, obviously, with headhunters, we mean the consultants. Headhunters might forget to get your CV into the system, in my humble experience. You can also do that, definitely, yes. So reactions, the reactions from recruitment companies where you contacted multiple people. There are one or two companies that have a fantastic candidate tracking system that will actually reply, and these are two in all Europe. They will say, oh, I can see that you have been in touch with my colleague X from the Bucharest office. He will be your lead contact person. Thank you very much. And that's it. So there is little chance, almost literally virtually no chance of running into a situation where they say, oh, but you have been in touch with 20 of my colleagues and we track you and we'll find you and you are desperate and da-da-da-da. So there's only one or two companies that actually have a fantastic candidate tracking system. The other reaction that might happen is for the recruitment company to come back and say, hey, actually, you know, because of GDPR and all the fuss with the data protection, etc., LinkedIn is now a database. So please contact us, find us on LinkedIn to be in our network. And if we have something, we'll find you. Thanks, Andrea, for mentioning. Thanks for joining. Okay. So inbox management. So now that you have a list of companies and a list of headhunters, how do you manage your inbox? How do you manage more than 200 recruiters or more than 50 recruiters and 100 decision makers, etc.? So a couple of tips here. Okay. So as you can see, with the headhunters and the direct approach, we have the same step. We need to make a list, find the contact people, contact them, and then follow up. Question to all of you here. If you contact 100 potential bosses in 100 different companies, how many do you think will react or respond? What do you think? Oh, I like that. 40%, 10%, more than 70%. I think Yaroslav knows something I don't. Ron says maybe 1 or 2, 15%, 20, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, less than 10, less than 5, 3%, 5 to 10%. So I think we can agree that all of you disagree. Everybody has a different perception of what's likely to happen. Before I give you the answer, okay, Ron says my answer is coming from age discrimination. Ron, let's talk about age discrimination in the Q&A session, if that's okay for you. Let me just make a note. Let's talk about age in the Q&A. Now that you've so vastly disagreed, how do you think how many will invite you to the interview out of 100 contacted potential bosses? 1 to 5. 2. Who gives less or more? 1 to 5. 0.5. 1. Okay. Good. What about headhunters? If you contact 100 headhunters, how many do you think, how will the headhunters respond? Better or worse than, let's keep it to better or worse. Do you think that headhunters are better or worse? It starts with worse, better, 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 better. Okay, at least the majority agrees on better. How do you think, if you contact 100 headhunters, how many will invite you to an interview? In other words, let's keep it to better and worse. Do you think more headhunters will invite you to interviews than potential bosses, or less? Less, more phone screening, less, more, less, more. Okay, here we can agree that we all disagree. I like that. Okay, let me show you the numbers that are completely counterintuitive. Okay, but let's first define response rate. So we have something called response rate, which we define as reaction of actively contacted people divided by the whole bulk. And reaction of effectively contacted means you have sent the first email and after 7 to 10 days, the follow-up email. If, and I can't stress this enough, if you have not sent a follow-up email after 7 to 10 days, it does not count. Follow-up is queen or king or whatever. So if, for example, you contacted 95 CEOs and 37 reacted, we have a response rate of 38.9%. So this is how we calculate it. A good response rate, or a standard response rate, is 30 to 50%. So 30 to 50% will react to your contact. Now, this is under the assumption that you've done everything right. Right list of companies, right positioning, perfect CV, well-written cover email, etc., etc. Interview rate, how do we calculate that? How many decided to interview you by phone, by Skype, in person, etc. From the whole bulk. And here a good interview rate is 5 to 10%. Andrea says, but this reaction might not be positive, I suppose. Of course not. Any kind of reaction. Thank you for a CV. Thanks, but no thanks. I've saved your CV in the database, etc., etc. And the KPIs for both headhunters and direct contact is exactly the same. There's no difference. So to summarize, response rate 30 to 50%, interview rate 5 to 10%. Good, 5 to 10% of the response rate, it's out of the total. So the interview rate is out of the total. If you have numbers that are lower than that, it means you're not doing something right. So you then go back to the drawing board and review the whole process. You audit. Have I set the right goal? Is it maybe too ambitious? Is it, and this goes both ways. Is it too ambitious or not ambitious enough? So over and under qualified. Is your unique selling proposition clear? Do you have one? Is it clear? Is it well described? Maybe it's something with your CV. Maybe it's your LinkedIn profile that contradicts your CV. Maybe your cover email is too pushy, too desperate, too generic. Maybe it has spelling mistakes that's off-putting, etc. There's so many, you can see there's so many little things that can be tweaked. Does this mean, another question, does this mean negative answers are also in the response rate of 30 to 50%? Yes, because for us, a positive response is the interview. So here we want the interview. Response rate means somebody has acknowledged that you're there, you are in the talent pool, you might be forwarded to HR, it might be a straight out listen, thank you very much, but we're currently not recruiting, etc. So they know that you exist as a candidate, 30 to 50%. And the only good response that we quantify, and the only thing that matters, do they interview, yes or no? Because if they interview you, it means there is real interest behind it, or real curiosity behind, curiosity about your profile. What happens if you have good KPIs, but they are low? So it's not 47%, it's not over 40, but it's closer to the 30. Here I have another question. What's the rate of then getting offered a job as well? It should be per 60 to 90 companies, 1 to 3 job offers. Same with the headhunters. So the offer rate is 2 to 3 per channel. So what do you do if you have good but low KPI? So it's still, well, let's say it's 30, around 30. Here an example, you contacted 100 companies, 30 responded, that 30% or 30 responded, 70 did not. So here you contact an alternative decision maker. So the marketing director didn't respond. Maybe there is a deputy marketing director or the regional marketing director. And once you contact the alternative decision maker, so you send the first email, you send the follow-up email, and again, 30 responded from the overall pool and 40 did not. So then you find a second alternative decision maker. There's always somebody that could be an alternative. If we look at it visually, and bear with me and concentrate a bit, I'll walk you through that. So we start on the top with the first email. And with the first email, what can happen right away? Interview information, interview invitation, or you have a reply, then you send a thank you email, or there can be no reply. If there's no reply, you send a follow-up email. And again, the follow-up email can lead to an interview, to a reply, then you say thank you, or no reply. If there's no reply, then you find an alternative decision maker. So you go, we call it second level inbox management. So alternative decision maker, send a first email, and then again, you could be invited to an interview, receive a reply, then you say thank you, or no reply, and then you follow up. And the follow up, and you get the picture. So to be sure, wherever there is a reply, positive, negative, and again, first, the only positive reply is, I'd like to interview you. So any kind of reaction, that's a RR, the response rate. And when it comes to interview scheduling, this is the interview rate. What's super important, and I think if I remember correctly, this was Martin saying, but what if how do I contact HR? What's now important in this whole spiel, I never said, our literature never says contact HR. If you contact HR, you will have a likely response rate of 0 to 5%, not even to mention interview rate. Why do you think, question to all of you, why do you think that is? Andrea says HR is not a decision maker. Correct. HR reacts and is not proactively involved in strategy. And as I said, strategy sometimes has not even been verbalized from the thought process that's happening in the brains of a decision maker to, because once there is a strategy and you need to hire somebody, you need to send a request, and sometimes a request for a new hire needs to go through 7 levels of accepting something in the system, etc., etc. They can be flooded with CVs, yes. HR has other tasks than recruiting, yes. What about our live streaming on Facebook? Any comments and questions here? Okay. Business has the needs, not HR. Exactly. So you get it. Having said that, HR can be a contact person in the 3rd level of inbox management, just to be on the safe side. Good. So we still have 45 minutes to go. I'm not sure if you can see the number of slides still up. So we have now completed 188 slides out of 287. I think we're doing quite well. Do you have any questions before I move on to networking? Any questions as to the recruiter channel or inbox management and how to manage the whole contact with headhunters and decision makers? No questions. Okay. Networking. The key to networking is, and I'll start right away with that, to be systematic and consistent. It should start 3 to 9 months prior to your job search, depending on how complex your job search is. Of course, not all of you will have those 3 to 9 months. And if you don't have that, then again, it's even more important to be strategic and purposeful. So how do you go about it? And this is not a fluffy, it's important to help others approach kind of thing. But here I'll walk you how to audit your network, how to go about qualifying your network, etc. So make sure you have something to write, because this can get quite technical. So step number 1, when using network as a job search channel, make sure you audit your network. Step 2, once you've audited, you divide your network into active networking, passive networking, no networking. Step number 3, you identify areas of improvement. 4, you prepare and implement a strategy. So how do you go about the audit? Ideally, you add all the contacts to your LinkedIn profile and then ask LinkedIn to download your contacts into an Excel file. For those who want to do that and reserve an afternoon for that, LinkedIn sometimes takes between 15 minutes and sometimes even 24 hours. So if you want to do the audit, make sure you request the download of your contacts in advance, so you're not frustrated that it's not here yet and I've been waiting for 2 hours. I see one more question. Do you recommend to ask somebody I know in the company to support my application? I'll answer that question a bit, okay? Let me just write it down. Recommendations. So this would be then actually networking versus direct approach. Okay, so ideally add your contacts to LinkedIn under the assumption that they have a LinkedIn profile. If they don't have a LinkedIn profile, you then add them manually to the Excel spreadsheet after the download. You export it into the file. You add anybody who is missing. You delete unnecessary columns and add 3 columns. So with the export, you'll get like telephone number, birth date, when you connected, blah, 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 blah. So delete anything that's unnecessary and you add 3 columns, which are super important. 1, is this contact personal or business or both? Second column, Are they strategic from your point of view in terms of the job search? Can they help you, yes or no? 3, what is the level of trust? 10 meaning best friends forever, knows all my secrets. 1, I don't even remember who that is. And qualify that level of trust, saying, okay, what by qualify I mean define what is a 10, what is a 9, what is an 8, what is a 7, what is a 5, etc. The fourth one is an optional one. Anything else that is important when qualifying the whole database. So maybe it's the type of language that you use when communicating. Are you on a first name basis, etc. And then you sit down and you qualify, you go through the hundreds of contacts, sometimes thousands of contacts on LinkedIn to decide personal, business, strategic, yes or no, level of trust, and any other columns you have added. Isabella asked, is there an option to download contacts on LinkedIn in settings? Yes. The easiest way to find it, and please don't laugh at me, go to Google and say, how do I download my contacts from LinkedIn? And it will directly get you the first search result is the link under the assumption that you've already been logged onto your LinkedIn account. You click there and this is how you get it. That's the easiest way because they kept moving it and it's relatively hidden. So this is really just click on it and it says download my contacts or something like that. Yeah, be practical, right? So then you qualify that and sort the file and divide them into segments. So this would be the second step. Sorting the file and divide them into segments, meaning because of the columns, you will have personal level of trust 10 in English, personal level of trust 10 German, business level of trust 8, formal contact, level of trust 5 in Polish, lots of people you used to work with more than 5 years ago. So once you have the different segments, you prepare different strategies for the different segments. With some people where there's a lot of trust, you can be more direct, actually pick up the phone and say, hey, I know we've been in touch last time 3 years ago, but I really need your help. So depending on the segment, you can be more or less straightforward. And depending on that as well, you will choose a different channel. In person, I know, maybe not now, but in a couple of weeks, by email, by phone, by WhatsApp, via Facebook, LinkedIn message, etc. So different strategies require different channels of contact. Approach, so how direct you are in one email, straightforward. Sometimes you want to first see, does the person remember you, and send maybe 2 or 3 different emails and do that in stages. And you then also adapt the language, how much detail you want to share, etc. And make sure to add the call to action to the strategy. What do you want? What do you expect from a certain segment? It's not always hiring you. Sometimes it's much more important to receive information. So that a little bit answers already Edita's question. Do you ask for recommendations? My response is with many things, it depends. Do you want a recommendation to when already in a recruitment process? Probably yes. Do you want a recommendation to get started into a recruitment process that you don't know whether it exists or not? Big question mark, because you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know if they are really that well liked as you might think that they are, etc., etc. So usually the way our recommendation would be try the direct way, and once there is interest, ask your First, ask your contacts within the company. Listen, I will be going to an interview. What can you tell me about the interviewer? Do you think a recommendation from you will help or not? So very often it's better to use the network as a source of information. So call to action, what do you want? Do you want to know if their company is hiring? Do you want them to share if they know that other companies are hiring? Do you want a recommendation? What do you want them to do? And well, anything else that might be important, make sure that you add that. Okay, and once you have the strategies, implement them. And that would be the fourth step, looking at the big picture. During the audit, you will hopefully see areas of improvement. You might realize, I don't have too many decision makers in my network. I don't have too many recruiters in my network. I don't have too many HR people in my network that could help me with recommendations, for example, or insider information. I don't have too many contacts in the country that I want to work in. I don't have too many contacts in the industry I want to move to, etc., etc. So again, you identify areas of improvement. You do your research. You can do the research online, contact people on LinkedIn, Xing, Internations, offline, conferences, events, networking evenings, trainings, webinars, etc. And again, you prepare and implement a strategy. Here, a couple of tips, and this goes for online and offline events or any kind of contact you might have with another professional. Before the contact, research and prepare. During the event or contact, make sure you have an elevator pitch. And the elevator pitch in our lingo would be your O2 presentation. It would be your unique selling proposition, which changes depending on your target group. And it's also very similar to what you say at the beginning of an interview, which we'll talk about in module 4. After the contact event, online, offline, make sure you send a personalized note and LinkedIn invitation and we'll discuss how to personalize invites in a second. Now, the most common mistakes, usually the networking channel is done too late. So when we are really desperate and really, or should I say, overly motivated to find a job, and the other side feels that, it's either too pushy or not pushy enough in terms of not direct enough, because there are certain assumptions. And an assumption that happens very often with especially people close to us, either personally or professionally, we assume they know what we need and want. So here, make sure, a common mistake would be to send out your CV to friends saying, hey, if you hear anything, attach my CV. What is anything? Do they know what you do for a living? Do you know what you're good at? Do you know what problems you can solve? So don't assume anything, and make sure that the message is clear, and also in terms of call to action. Very often, again, a common mistake is to have no strategy and be random about it, and just react to what you see in front of your screen without any strategic notion behind it. Misuse of social media, and I'll give you a couple of examples of how people looking for jobs misuse LinkedIn. And one of those misuses is tagline. Here, a question: can you send us the presentation after this meeting? Sorry, we are not sharing the presentation. As I said at the very beginning, please take notes. We will post a recording on our YouTube channel that I invite you to subscribe to, but we're not sharing the presentation. So common mistakes, tagline, to add in your tagline that you're looking for a job, that you're looking for a new challenge, that you're open to new challenges or opportunities. For example, and here, because I think have only one person from the US attending, so I said, okay, I'll look for people in the US to find good, bad examples. So here we have unemployed at looking for a job now. Looking for a job now. Looking for a job at actively looking for a job. Actively looking for a job in Chicago, call and the telephone number. Still looking for a job at I don't have a job. Looking for a job at looking for a job, hashtag pay the bills. Believe me, there is no recruiter on this planet who gets up in the morning, gets in front of their laptop with a fresh cup of coffee and says, let me look for candidates looking for a job and let's see if I maybe have recruitment processes that might fit their needs. No. Here, and you will see this is old data from a couple of weeks ago, a number of job search taglines on LinkedIn. People using that tagline have gone up by about 5 to 6%. We have stopped tracking the tagline in that way because LinkedIn changed the algorithm and it changed how they there's a lot of inconsistencies. I don't want it's a little bit technical, but it's not a reliable KPI anymore, so we stopped doing it this way. But this was back 4 weeks ago when we still could do it. You could see within a week 5% up when it comes to that tagline. Here again, Adita already mentioned it. The posts, dear network, I'm looking for a job. Even worse if you add your CV. People, this is your personal data. If you then wake up one morning with credits that you never asked for, you will know where they come from. This is, hackers are having a field day with everyone posting their CVs with their personal data. Here another one. I didn't look for French examples on purpose. They popped out all on their own. This is more common mistakes from the third category. So first category, misusing the tagline. Second category is directly posting your CV. And this is the third category, complaining about interviews and actually calling out the company. It doesn't do anybody good. Here, a gentleman, a project manager, had an interview today scheduled by the company recruiter for the role. When I got there, they were shocked and had no record of my interview. The HR lady was on the phone and the receptionist said she'd be right out. 30 minutes later, interview was at Johnson Controls. What have you had happen as a bad interview experience? And then he posted a response where the HR person said, well, actually, we stopped interviewing and they should have told you. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. No. Of course, it's wrong and I understand the frustration, but sharing that publicly for anybody to be able to search, that already is like, okay, that could be a difficult candidate. Watch out. If I say the wrong thing, I might end up on social media. No. Good. So recommendations when it comes to networking. It's best to do systematically 5 people per day, not 20, not 1. 5 is something that usually is realistic to keep up a certain discipline. Start with the ones that you are afraid of the most or give you the jitters, because that means they are the most strategic. And the most strategic means they can help you the most. If you want to first get going, start with a couple of easy ones, see what the response is, but then move to the ones that you have the most respect for and that give you the jitters. Don't stop until you've actually signed a contract. I can't, again, stress that enough. Your job search, your active job search process ends not even the day you sign a new contract, but after signing an employment contract. We have even seen candidates or companies withdraw from employment contracts on the day of signing them. So anything you do, be it networking, contact with headhunters, direct approach, etc., you keep on looking until the very moment you actually sign the contract. Not when it's on your email account, not when you know that you will sign it in 3 days. No. If a company wants to interview you on Tuesday at 10 and you are expected to sign the contract on Tuesday at 3, you still take that interview at 10. Okay. I see 2 more questions. On LinkedIn, there are 2 options. 1, to open only to the recruiters that you're looking for a job. 2, to open everyone. So do you recommend to go for option 1? Okay. When it comes to LinkedIn, I think we discussed it in the second module, how to add the job preferences. If you currently have a job, open it only to the recruiters. If you don't have a job and it's public knowledge, then I don't see why not to open it and click on it to be visible to everybody. Should we add paper recommendations in your cover email? Okay, I will now exaggerate my answer a bit, and I think I've used this example during the first or second module. Imagine that you go on a first date with your medical records and a prenup. I was like, oh, whoa, I just want to have a first date. So I know that wasn't the question, but I'm exaggerating for, what's the word? Well, you know what I mean. So here the idea is you only send the minimum required. So if you send with the cover email the CV, that's more than enough. There are a lot of people who send a CV in English, in German, and Polish, with the reference letters and the Arbeitszeugnisse and maybe a download of the recommendations of LinkedIn. And it's like, whoa, that's far too much. It's really going with your medical records and a prenup to your first date. That would even be, sorry, even because a date would be an interview. So that would actually, I don't know, you start chatting with somebody on Tinder and that's what you send before the first. Sorry. Oy. So please don't add anything. If the company or the recruiter needs it, they'll ask for it. Yeah, you're welcome. How important are recommendations from others on LinkedIn? Good question. Let's talk about that in the Q&A. Let me just make a note because I want to make sure I get through the main content and recommendations on LinkedIn. You mentioned that we should not appear desperate, so should we not disclose that our current employment is ending? Well, ending is a fact. That is not desperation. So make sure you stick to the truth. If you've stopped, if employment stopped in March, that's what you then say on LinkedIn. So this is not about hiding something or being ashamed of having lost a job, etc. This is communicating a fact. So don't confuse these two. Okay. Especially if you are in a mature market, mature markets are more competitive and you can't afford not to do networking in competitive markets. Here another question, having been contacted by a recruiter for a job position, would it be adequate to answer yes? When and if asked, are you actively searching or do you have other interviews scheduled? This is a question for module 4. In Module 4, we will talk about how to answer interview questions. However, I will respond to that one. If a recruiter asks you about your job search status, answer with the truth. If you're actively looking, this is what you say. If you're passively looking, this is what you say. If you have indeed other interviews scheduled, this is what you say. They need to know, they simply need to know if you are a candidate, they need to move on quickly. Let's say you are waiting for an offer next week and they know that their client is not ready to make a decision until another 4 weeks. They will tell you, listen, or maybe not tell you. Well, some might be able to tell you straightforward, some you will see by action. They will simply not waste your time because you don't match the timing of the recruitment project. So here, always tell the truth. Okay, and to finish the recommendations, it is a relatively slow channel for response to come in for the call to actions, so start immediately. Personalize your invitation also on the mobile phone. And here Susanne pointed it out in our group. We have a group for all participants. And there are screens that show you how to personalize an invitation by mobile on LinkedIn. Be purposeful and strategic. Use LinkedIn as a branding tool. How do you do that? Cover the basics. Make sure you have a good profile. Publish content for your target group. Share content of the people and companies you'd like to work for or with. And if you want to read more, I can highly recommend Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone. And for those who are more on the introvert analytical side, Rainmaking by Fort Harding. Job ads. I did say we'll look at all 4 channels. This is a reminder from the previous module. Make sure you have a CV that fits applicant tracking systems. Make sure you know how to optimize your LinkedIn profile for job ads and that you have actually done that and done the research and added the necessary skills. As mentioned before, we already have set up a group for the participants of the open webinars of both editions, the English-speaking one and the Polish-speaking one. You can ask your fellow group members to endorse your skills. That will give you points and increase your chances when applying to job ads that are particularly popular. For those who know it, they know it. Job ads, there is nothing magic about job ads. RTFM, on April 25, so 3 days ago, I received an email, and I want to highlight, because it's really RTFM. Sandra, I used your script and especially the jobs can page to optimize my CV. She then applied to a job that was her dream job with a really good company as a test, just to see if it would work. She got invited to an interview and she recently signed her employment contract. Does it mean that it will work with everybody within 3 hours, etc.? Of course not. But there is no magic to job ads. You need to understand how it works and then use that know-how to your advantage. And last but not least, timing. Here, the timing is that I'll discuss with you is under the assumption that everything is well prepared. The list of companies, the email addresses, your CV, your unique selling proposition, the goal, etc. You start with all 4 channels at the same time. You contact 75 to 90 companies or 90 to 120 if you're under time pressure, and about 50 headhunters per country. And you choose the path of the least resistance, so it's obvious and easy, standard candidate profile, job ads, job description match. From a timing perspective, it takes 2 to 4 weeks to prepare everything well. I actually have now a client who has broken all kinds of records. On his own, he found 50 headhunters in Switzerland within 1 day, and he's prepared a list of 124 companies within 3 days. So he beats all preparation time. It's definitely doable. The job search time would be 8 to 12 weeks after the 2 to 4 weeks of preparation time. And here I've added a little plus, 8 to 12 plus weeks of job search. Why the plus? The plus refers to people, if you're more senior, the more time it takes. And by senior, I don't mean old. So here seniority is seniority in terms of organizational seniority. So C-level, regional roles, global roles, they need more time because of the processing. Some companies haven't yet figured out if they want to do recruitment entirely without face-to-face interviews. So this adds a plus because some companies might decide to wait for the traveling restrictions to be over, so they actually want to meet somebody in person. Having said that, we've already received a couple of examples from our clients where they themselves or people closest to them have been hired fully virtually without ever meeting anybody, and they've taken on management roles of teams they have never met in person. So here the plus is every company uses it or reacts to that differently. The other plus is, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball and we really don't know how bad it really might be. I've seen today one of the articles that is more positive on how quickly economy will bounce back, but nobody knows. And because nobody knows, I do recommend you to be flexible as to part-time contract and freelance options. It is better to be underemployed than completely unemployed. Yeah. So before the Q&A, a couple of things. If you can think of friends, family members, colleagues, former colleagues, please help us spread the word about Career Angels and those open webinars. We have one more module next week about online interviews. Then we have a week break and we start with the second edition. You can also recommend the recordings. Help us spread the word. Help us help others, in other words. In the meantime, if you want to keep up with what's going on, you can follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow our blog. You can read and share the guide on job search in light of COVID-19. That's the one that I mentioned at the very, very beginning. And please do use our free materials on our website. And again, please don't laugh. We're looking for Edna. Edna is somebody who wanted to join our webinars. But when we reply to Edna's emails, her domain rejects our messages. So Edna, we have received your emails. We keep replying, but your server doesn't like us. So we are not being rude. We know that you exist. And there is only one Edna. So Edna, if you see this in the recording or if you are online today, please get in touch with us from a different email address. Okay. I'll get to Agent a bit. I'll talk about Agent during the Q&A. So again, before the Q&A, you can join a group that we have set up for both editions, English and Polish, but the language in the group is English. It is called Open Webinars by Career Angels Group, only for participants. Marcelina, the one who emails with you, will check if, she will verify all requests to make sure only people are let in who are part of this community. And if you'd like to and you think this is valuable, please do support our crowdfunding through PayPal. Some of you that are here today have already done that. Thank you so much. Producing in total 16 webinars without any support from any corporations, etc., when we ourselves are going through tough times isn't the easiest bit, but we believe it's the right thing to do. So if you want to support that, thanks a lot. And now the Q&A. We have 11 more minutes left. We've gone through 287 slides. And I think the first question I'll answer that I delayed for the Q&A is how important are recommendations on LinkedIn, because that's more relevant to a bigger group of people listening. And again, if you are on Facebook on live streaming, please feel free to ask your questions in the comment section. So recommendations on LinkedIn. GDPR in Europe has made it relatively tricky to verify references. And what do I mean by that? So for a company to be allowed to contact somebody, they need their consent for data processing. In other words, if you're a candidate and you say, listen, I have excellent references, you can call my previous boss. This is their email address and telephone number. The candidate is giving consent for a third party, but not the third party directly. So if HR or the recruiter works in a company that has been trained by very strict lawyers and has a very strict compliance department, they will refrain from checking that reference. Some of them say, well, if the consent has been given by email for it's not that important. So you will see different levels of strictness depending on different corporations, recruiters, and headhunters. So the recommendations on LinkedIn start becoming more and more important because it's public, and when it's published, there must be consent so you can get in touch. If you have, because now, bear with me, a reference letter is not the same as actually being allowed to call somebody on the phone. So if you have consent from colleagues, former superiors, etc., to share their contact information, make sure you have to consent on paper to be allowed to forward to potential employers, because then that is then written consent that a potential employer can call them. So this is one bit. The other bit, I'd say yes, definitely collect recommendations on LinkedIn because they're slowly or rapidly becoming an alternative to the phone calls. Make sure the recommendations are well written. And one thing, and this is more a branding perception point of view, make sure you have a balance between recommendations you yourself have given to others and you have received. When there's a mismatch in giving and receiving, it looks a bit funny, iffy, whatever. Okay, so I hope I've answered that question in terms of recommendations. Now let's talk about age. Every year, we're very meticulous in tracking our statistics, and you can download the job hunting report from our website directly on the first page. We also look at how does age influence the job search time or job search effectiveness, etc. The only statistically significant difference we have found is that professionals that are 50 or older look for a job 2 to 4 weeks longer. Having said that, they need to be more careful with two things. One, you need to find you need to be more careful when selecting companies. For example, we had one client, CFO, who was at the time 55, I believe. And we specifically targeted companies where the board was 50 plus, which means there is a higher chance that they themselves appreciate seniority. And that worked very well. The other thing is, especially if you're under time pressure, etc., extend the number of companies right away to 90 to 120. Don't even wait for it. Just go for a higher number of companies and higher number of recruiters. So that's in terms of age. What about salary expectations during COVID? Is there any report that already caught the change in offered salaries? I haven't seen any reports yet. There are some industries who still go about business as usual, especially pharma. On the other hand, if you are in the area, well, not in the area, what I want to say, sorry, I got distracted by the next comment. Martin, thank you for thinking this was great. There are a number of companies that have a halted recruitment, and in order to prevent bankruptcy, they have offered their employees to cut salaries by anywhere between 10 and usually about 20%. I have not yet seen reports of the changes all across the board. So we'll keep looking and tracking the data. Having said that, what's also important, you also need to see what type of country you're in. Are you in a country with or without government support? Where there is no government support, their reactions and the COVID effects are much faster, and you can see decrease in salary in certain industries. If you're in a country with government support, the effects will be more delayed, I'd say. I get age. Okay. Here one more comment. I get age probably discrimination for a long time. I know it's a tricky subject, but contacting the right companies, the right number of companies, with the right approach should work in the job search. We have not yet found anybody 50 plus who, when sticking to everything we discussed today and across the last modules and what we'll discuss in the next module, there is no other option than succeed. Next question. You advise to contact 50 plus headhunters. By doing this, sending your CV to all, how can you manage your personal data? What do you mean? A headhunter by definition is a professional entity. So they will store the data and process it with your consent. And headhunters by definition are not allowed to forward your documents without your consent. If they share your CV without asking you, they will always do so in a blinded manner. So there is virtually no risk on your side. Next, thank you, Sandra and team. Great insight, ideas, and tricks as always. Thank you so much. We have 3 more minutes. If you have any other questions, let me know. Okay, yes, sorry, Robert. Thank you so much for posting the question again. Can I answer to several job offers from the same company at the same time, for example, senior and junior positions? That's a tough one. Well, let's put it that way. I don't know if you've already watched the second module where we talk about applicant tracking systems and job scan. My recommendation here is use job scan to see what role you fit better, and then use the one where there's a higher likelihood of success. An alternative would be to actually, because it is a published job ad, to actually reach out to the recruitment manager or HR of that company and say, listen, I've seen 2 positions. I do qualify probably for both. I'm not sure which one I should apply to. Attached my CV. What would you recommend? You could try that as well. There are more thank yous coming in. I'm so happy you found this useful. Please do help us spread the word. If you've any other questions, we have 1 more minute. Okay, just more thank yous coming in. Thank you, Sandra, for taking the time to give insights to others with such an amazing contact. Much appreciated. Thanks to your team too. I'll pass on the thanks. Thank you so much. Okay, I apparently missed a question. Let me scroll back. Yeah, would it be adequate to send a CV directly to a hiring manager, though same CV has been introduced to the manager by their colleague who happens to be part of my professional network, yet unfortunately didn't get any feedback from the colleague? Okay, so we have like, what shall I do? Contact directly. Okay, so here my recommendation would be pin down your colleague and make sure the colleague follows up. If it's not a close colleague, somebody more distant, the world belongs to the brave, so go get in touch directly with the manager. One more question. How difficult is it to change position from personal assistant to HR? Oh, that's a long answer. Personal assistant to HR, given that, I mean, if it's an HR junior role, researcher, etc., that could be a relatively easy get in, but it's a very vague question, so I'd need more context to answer it more precisely. Good, thank you so much for joining in today. The recordings will be uploaded. We have also greetings from Mexico, fantastic. So we had US, Mexico, Singapore, Austria and Portugal, Germany. This has been really global. Thank you so much for joining in. And we have also Facebook thank yous from the live streaming, fantastic. Marcelina will be in touch with you with the promised materials on how to find email addresses of your decision makers, and with the recordings as well. So thank you so much and have a lovely Tuesday. Bye.